In a small Ohio town, a late-night wheelchair repair turns into something far more powerful. When a little girl whispers an innocent wish, "Please marry my mom," a humble mechanic and a single mother's life begin to change forever. This heartwarming story will remind you how one act of kindness can spark miracles. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's get started. In the quiet town of Maplewood, Ohio, the streets often grew still after sunset. It was a place where everyone knew each other's name, where gossip traveled faster than the mail, and where kindness was sometimes the only currency people had to trade. Ethan, a 28-year-old mechanic, was one of those familiar faces in town. His garage sat on the corner of Main Street, a humble place filled with grease-stained tools, half-fixed. Cars, and the faint smell of motor oil. It wasn't glamorous, but it was his world. That night, after a long day of fixing engines, Ethan was preparing to close when fate placed someone unexpected in his path. As he stepped outside to lock the garage, the sound of scraping metal caught his ear. He turned and saw a woman struggling with a battered wheelchair at the far end of the street. The chair wobbled, one wheel nearly snapping off as its occupant tried to maneuver it forward. Beside her stood a little girl, perhaps no older than 7, clutching a worn teddy bear in one hand. Her big brown eyes locked onto Ethan's, silently pleading for help. Ethan wiped his hands on his ragged overalls and walked toward them without hesitation, his heart tightening at the sight. The woman, Grace, looked exhausted. Her long brown hair was tied loosely, strands falling over her tired face. She tried to push the chair herself, but it resisted every move. "It's okay, honey, we'll figure it out," she whispered to her daughter, her voice gentle but trembling. The girl, Chloe, glanced up and then turned to Ethan, tugging at her mother's sleeve. "Mom, maybe he can help," she said softly, her voice carrying a mixture of innocence and hope. Grace hesitated, pride and weariness battling inside her, but Ethan's kind expression disarmed her. "Looks like you're having a tough time," Ethan said warmly, crouching down to inspect the wheelchair. "Mind if I take a look? I've fixed a lot of things in my life, but I think this one might be the most important tonight," Grace nodded. Reluctantly, grateful yet embarrassed, Ethan grabbed his small toolkit from his garage, his hands steady and practiced as he assessed the damage. The wheel axle was bent, the bearings were worn, and the frame looked like it hadn't been serviced in years. He could tell this wasn't just a minor issue, it was a struggle that had plagued them for a long time. While Ethan worked, Chloe stood close, watching him intently. Her curiosity overpowered her shyness, and she leaned in to ask, "Are you going to make it?" "Better," Ethan smiled. "I'll do my best. Little one, we can't let this chair give your mom any more trouble, can we?" Chloe shook her head, her pigtails bouncing, and then lowered her voice as if sharing a secret. "You're really nice. Please marry my mom. She deserves someone kind like you." Ethan's hands froze mid-turn of his. Wrench. He looked up, stunned, his eyes meeting Grace's, who turned crimson with embarrassment. Grace's breath caught, her lips parting in shock. "Chloe!" she scolded, her cheeks flushing. "That's not something you just say to people." But Chloe didn't look ashamed. Instead, she smiled with the pure, unfiltered honesty only a child could possess. Ethan chuckled nervously, scratching the back of his neck. "That's quite the request," he said, trying to ease the tension. Grace avoided his gaze, focusing instead on smoothing Chloe's hair, though her heart raced. She hadn't expected such words to spill from her daughter's lips, especially not in front of a stranger. Yet deep down, she knew Chloe had simply voiced the longing they both carried, the desire for kindness, stability, and someone who truly cared. The silence that followed was heavy, but Ethan broke it with a light-hearted grin. "Well, let's just start with fixing this chair, okay?" he said, turning his attention back to the tools. Chloe giggled, satisfied with her daring statement, and Grace sighed in relief, though her mind churned with thoughts she tried to bury. Ethan worked carefully, his skilled hands adjusting the broken wheel and replacing a few screws he had in his kit. He didn't just fix the problem, he polished the worn bearings, tightened the handles, and adjusted the seat to make it more comfortable. It was clear he wasn't just patching up the chair, he was giving it a new life. As the repairs went on, Grace found herself watching him closely. His concentration was steady, his movements precise, yet there was a gentleness to him that she hadn't seen in many men. Life had been hard on her since the accident that left her partially dependent on the wheelchair. Many people pitied her, others avoided her, but this stranger treated the chair with the same respect as if he were repairing a valuable car. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not as a burden, not as a disabled woman, but as a human being worthy of care. When Ethan finally tightened the last bolt, he wiped his brow and gave the wheel a firm spin. It turned smoothly, without a single squeak. "There," he said proudly. "Good as new, well, almost, but it'll roll a lot better now." Grace tested it cautiously, moving forward a few inches. Her eyes widened as the chair glided easily across the pavement. Chloe squealed with delight, clapping her small hands. "It works, you fixed it," she shouted. Grace looked at Ethan, her lips trembling into a small smile. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. Ethan shrugged modestly. It was nothing, just a little fix. But Grace knew it was more than that. It wasn't just about the chair. It was about someone caring enough to stop, to help, and to treat them with dignity. Chloe threw her arms around Ethan's waist in an innocent hug. "You're a hero," she whispered. Ethan's chest tightened as he looked down at her, realizing how rare it must have been for this little girl to see kindness from strangers. He patted her shoulder gently, unsure what else to say. The night air grew cooler, and the street grew quieter, but the warmth of the moment lingered. Grace shifted uncomfortably in her seat, feeling both gratitude and vulnerability. She wanted to say more, to thank him properly, but the weight of Chloe's earlier words still hung between them. Ethan sensed it too, but instead of addressing it, he gave her a reassuring nod. "Take care of yourselves, okay? And if the chair gives you trouble again, you know where to find me." With that, he began to gather his tools, his mind spinning with the unexpected encounter. As Grace wheeled herself smoothly forward, Chloe skipped alongside her, glancing back at Ethan. She waved cheerfully, calling out, "Don't forget what I said." Grace's cheeks burned once more, but she didn't scold her this time. She couldn't, because deep inside, a part of her wondered what it would be like if Chloe's innocent wish came true. And for Ethan, watching them disappear into the night, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just shifted in a way he didn't fully understand. Little did he know that simple repair had just set in motion a story far bigger than himself. Over the following weeks, life in Maplewood seemed to move at its usual slow pace, but for Grace and Chloe, everything began to feel different. Every few days, Ethan would stop by to check on the wheelchair he had repaired, making sure it still rolled smoothly. He would adjust a screw here, tighten a handle there, or just polish the wheels so they wouldn't squeak. To Grace, these visits became more than just mechanical checkups. They became moments of reassurance, reminders that there was someone willing to look out for them without expecting anything in return. Chloe's joy was impossible to contain. Each time Ethan arrived, she would rush to the door, her little feet pounding against the worn wooden floor of their small home. "Ethan's here," she would shout, her voice filled with pure excitement. Grace would try to quiet her down, but the truth was, she looked forward to his visits too. She had lived through years of loneliness, with only her daughter and memories of better days to keep her company. Now, the sound of Ethan's laugh filling the house made it feel warmer than it had in years. Grace couldn't help but notice how naturally Ethan fit into their lives. He never forced his presence or acted as though he was doing them a favor. He would sit with Chloe and patiently answer her endless questions about tools, cars, and how engines worked. Sometimes he would even let her help with the simplest repairs, handing her a small wrench and showing her how to turn it. Chloe beamed with pride at these moments, and Grace watched in quiet amazement, seeing her daughter's world brighten in ways she had never expected. For Ethan, the bond forming between them was equally surprising. He had always been the type of man who worked late into the night, often alone, finding comfort in the hum of machines rather than people. Relationships had never been his strong suit, and he carried the scars of abandonment from his own past. But around Grace and Chloe, something in him softened. Grace's resilience, the way she faced her challenges with quiet strength, stirred respect in him. And Chloe's innocence, her unfiltered love and trust, touched the part of him that longed for family, but never thought he'd find it. The town, of course, began to notice. Maplewood was small, and nothing stayed secret for long. People whispered when they saw Ethan pushing Grace's chair down Main Street, or when he carried Chloe on his shoulders during a trip to the park. Some smiled approvingly, touched by the unlikely companionship. Others raised their eyebrows, wondering what a struggling mechanic and a single mother could possibly offer each other. But Ethan and Grace paid little attention to the gossip. They were too busy discovering a kind of peace they hadn't realized they were missing. One Sunday afternoon, Ethan surprised Chloe with a small project. He had built her a wooden toy car, carefully painted in bright red, with her initials carved into the side. When he handed it to her, Chloe squealed with delight, hugging it to her chest. "You made this just for me?" she asked, her eyes wide with awe. Ethan chuckled, ruffling her hair. "Of course. Every mechanic needs a good assistant, don't they?" Chloe beamed, and Grace's heart swelled as she watched the bond between them grow deeper. It wasn't just kindness anymore, it was something resembling family. Grace, however, couldn't ignore the feelings that were slowly blooming inside her. Each time Ethan visited, she found herself laughing more easily, smiling, without effort. She noticed the way his hands, rough and scarred from years of hard work, could handle both heavy tools and delicate adjustments on her wheelchair with equal care. She noticed how his eyes softened when Chloe spoke, or how he always made sure she felt included. Grace tried to push the feelings aside, reminding herself of her struggles, her limitations, and the fear of being hurt again. But the walls she had built around her heart were beginning to crumble. Ethan, too, felt the shift, though he struggled to name it. Late at night in his quiet garage, he caught himself thinking about Grace's laugh or the way Chloe held his hand. He scolded himself, telling his heart not to hope for more than friendship. But the thought lingered. Nonetheless, he wasn't a wealthy man or someone with grand achievements. He was just a mechanic, scraping by to pay his bills. Yet for the first time, he wondered if maybe what he had to offer, a steady hand, a loyal heart, and genuine care, was enough. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan began spending more time at their house, fixing not just the wheelchair, but small things around the home. He repaired a leaky faucet in the kitchen, replaced a broken lock on the door, and even built a small ramp leading to the porch so Grace could move in and out with ease. Each gesture was simple, but to Grace, they were monumental. She had grown used to doing everything alone, but now she had someone who saw her needs without her having to ask. And that, more than anything, made her feel cherished. One evening after dinner, Chloe sat cross-legged on the floor with her toy car, while Ethan and Grace talked quietly at the table. "You've done so much for us," Grace said softly, her voice carrying gratitude and something more. "I don't know how to—" "Thank you?" Ethan shook his head, leaning back in his chair. "You don't have to thank me, Grace. I like being here. I like being with you two." His words lingered in the air, and Grace felt her chest tighten. For a moment their eyes met, and unspoken emotions passed between them, delicate yet undeniable. The innocence of Chloe once again pierced the moment. Looking up from her toy, she declared, "See, Mom, I told you he should marry you." Grace's face flushed, and Ethan nearly choked on his drink, but Chloe only giggled, unaware of the weight of her words. Grace tried to hush her daughter, but deep down, she couldn't ignore how much truth there was in that innocent wish. Ethan smiled awkwardly, but as the laughter settled, he caught Grace's gaze again, and this time neither of them looked away. The bond they had was no longer just about kindness. It was friendship, companionship, and perhaps the beginning of something deeper. Grace found herself dreaming of a future where she wasn't alone, where Chloe had the father figure she had always longed for, and where love could grow despite the hardships. Ethan found himself imagining the same, though he didn't dare voice it yet. For both of them, the possibility of love was fragile, unspoken, but it was there, waiting patiently, like a seed ready to bloom. And so, while the whispers in town continued, while challenges still loomed on the horizon, Grace, Ethan, and Chloe discovered something precious, that sometimes love begins not with grand gestures or perfect circumstances, but with small acts of kindness, shared laughter, and the courage to let someone in. And though none of them could yet see where the road would lead, their hearts knew one thing for certain: their lives had already begun to change forever. One golden afternoon, the park buzzed with life. Children ran across the grass, their laughter filling the air, while the faint smell of fresh popcorn drifted from a nearby cart. Grace sat beneath a large oak tree, her wheelchair parked on a soft patch of shade, watching Chloe chase a butterfly across the field. Ethan arrived carrying a picnic basket, his shirt slightly wrinkled, grease still faintly visible on his hands. "You didn't have to," Grace said softly, smiling as he laid out sandwiches and fruit. "I wanted to," Ethan replied, his voice simple, but his eyes full of sincerity. Chloe dashed back, cheeks flushed, plopping onto the blanket beside them. "This is the best day ever," she declared, grabbing a sandwich eagerly. Ethan chuckled, handing her a napkin, while Grace watched the scene unfold with quiet joy. For the first time in years, she felt like she belonged somewhere, like she wasn't just surviving, but living. The loneliness that once haunted her evenings had been replaced by laughter, by companionship, and by the steady presence of a man who had stepped into her world with nothing but kindness in his hands. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, Grace's voice broke the comfortable silence. "Ethan," she said, her tone gentle but filled with weight, "I want you to know something. Before you came into our lives, I thought I'd lost hope. I thought Chloe and I were destined to just get by. But you've shown me something different. You've reminded me that there's still kindness, still love, still reasons to believe in a future." Her eyes glistened with tears she tried to hold back, her voice trembling yet strong. Ethan's chest tightened as her words sank in. He looked at Grace, really looked at the strength in her posture despite her struggles, at the love she poured into her daughter, and at the gentle warmth in her eyes that met his without hesitation. Then he glanced at Chloe, who sat between them, munching on an apple and humming to herself as though the world were perfect. In that moment, Ethan realized he had stumbled upon something priceless. He hadn't just fixed a wheelchair, he had discovered the very thing his heart had always longed for but never dared to imagine: a family. From that day forward, their bond only grew stronger. Ethan became a constant part of their lives, joining Grace and Chloe for dinners, helping with homework, and sharing small adventures that became cherished memories. He fixed more than just things around their house. He fixed the silence that once lingered in their lives. Grace found herself laughing again, often without reason, while Chloe began to talk about her future with excitement. The once lonely little girl now proudly introduced Ethan to her classmates as "my mom's best friend," though her mischievous grin hinted she had bigger dreams for him. Months passed and seasons changed. The whispers in town about Ethan and Grace shifted from idle gossip to admiration. People saw the way Ethan treated Grace, with dignity, with respect, with genuine love that had nothing to do with appearances or pity. They saw the way Chloe's eyes sparkled when he was around, the way she held his hand as though it belonged to her all along. Even those who had once doubted now admitted that the unlikely trio seemed destined to be together. For Ethan and Grace, the opinions of others mattered little. What mattered was the quiet joy they shared every single day. One crisp autumn evening, as leaves danced in the wind, Ethan invited Grace and Chloe back to the park where so much had begun. He had prepared everything carefully, though his hands shook with nervousness as he adjusted the picnic blanket and checked his pocket for the small velvet box. Grace arrived in her wheelchair, Chloe skipping beside her with boundless excitement. "What's all this?" Grace asked, curiosity in her tone. Ethan smiled nervously, trying to steady his breath. "Just another picnic," he said, though his heart pounded with anticipation. They laughed, ate, and reminisced under the fading light, Chloe giggling at Ethan's silly stories. As the stars began to emerge, Ethan stood and took a deep breath. Kneeling down in front of Grace, he opened the box, revealing a simple but beautiful ring. Grace gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, while Chloe's eyes widened with delight. "Grace," Ethan began, his voice steady though his heart raced, "you and Chloe have brought light into my life in ways I can't explain. I don't want to just be part of your world. I want to build a future with you. Will you marry me?" For a moment, silence hung in the air, broken only by the distant sound of crickets. Then Chloe clapped her hands, bouncing with uncontainable joy. "My wish came true!" she squealed, jumping into Grace's lap. Tears streamed down Grace's cheeks as she looked at Ethan, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, stronger. "Yes, Ethan, I'll marry you." Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling, and the three embraced under the night sky, their laughter and tears blending into one perfect moment of love and promise. News of the engagement spread quickly through Maplewood. The same townspeople who once gossiped about their unlikely bond now celebrated their love as if it were their own victory. People admired how a humble mechanic and a resilient single mother had found strength in each other, proving that real love wasn't about perfection or wealth, but about compassion, respect, and the courage to believe again. Chloe proudly told everyone at school, "Ethan's going to be my dad." And no one could deny the glow of happiness that surrounded their little family. Their wedding, though modest, was filled with warmth. Friends and neighbors gathered in a small chapel decorated with wildflowers, watching as Grace, radiant in her gown, wheeled down the aisle with Chloe walking beside her, scattering petals. Ethan stood at the altar, his eyes never leaving hers, his heart pounding with gratitude. When they exchanged vows, promising to stand by each other through every challenge, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. And when they were pronounced husband and wife, Chloe jumped between them, wrapping her arms around both, sealing their family in laughter and joy. In the weeks that followed, their story spread beyond the town, shared on social media and in local newspapers. People from across the state wrote messages of encouragement, touched by the reminder that kindness can spark miracles. Strangers admired Ethan's humility, Grace's resilience, and Chloe's innocent hope that had brought everything together. The small act of fixing a wheelchair had become the seed of a story that reminded the world that love often begins with compassion, and that sometimes even the simplest gesture can change lives forever. For Ethan, Grace, and Chloe, life was far from perfect, but it was real, filled with love, laughter, and hope. They faced challenges together, leaning on one another through hardships and celebrating small victories with joy. Every evening, as Ethan closed the garage and returned home to their laughter, he was reminded that he hadn't just gained a family, he had gained purpose, belonging, and the kind of love that lasts a lifetime. And for Grace and Chloe, their once lonely world had been transformed by a man who came into their lives with nothing more than kindness in his heart.